千里之行，始于足下。A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. Welcome to Tao Talks with Derek Lin, where we delve deeply into the Daodejing by Lao Tzu. When we take a look at 44, we see that it's a chapter of 8 lines. Well, haven't we seen this before? Chapter 43 also contained 8 lines. So structurally, are they the same? Well, it turns out they're not. One of the remarks that I made the last time was that when you see 8 lines in ancient Chinese poetry, there's a likelihood that the 8 lines can be divided into 2 halves of 4 lines each. And each half can be further divided into 2 sets of 2 lines each. So then you have AB, 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 AB. That was the structure of chapter 43. It is simplistic to assume that this chapter would also have the same structure, but as we look deeper into this particular one, we see that it's actually not the case, as you will see for yourself in the next few slides. So we're going to be doing what we usually do, what nobody else does, really. We're looking at the original Chinese characters in order to discern some kind of structure in it. It's not as challenging as it may sound. Just looking at lines 1, 2, and 3 as an example, and even without knowing the ancient Chinese characters, just by looking at the characters that repeat themselves, graphically, visually, pictorially, we can see actually patterns of reiteration, which I have now highlighted in red. So as you can see, in the first 3 lines, we get 2 repeating characters in the second and fourth positions respectively. And the first 3 lines, they are all 5 characters each. So there's a poetic reiteration, a poetic structure reiterating from 1 down to 3. And when we look at the English translation, we see that the pattern is replicated. All 3 lines are framed as a question and asking which is better, which is more, to ask us to compare 2 things basically. So this is enough for us to discern that in the first 3 lines we have really the first section. So then the question following that would be, how would we divide up the remaining 5 lines? With 5 lines, you would probably guess that it's 3 and 2 or 2 and 3. Let's take a look. So scanning the characters for line 4 and line 5, there is actually only 1 character that is repeating. Let me highlight it. It is a character B. It means must. So you will find the word must in the translation to the right side. And it is also worth pointing out that this is actually a reiteration in structure as well. It doesn't look that way because line 4 appears to have 7 characters and line 5 has 5 characters. In reality, they're both lines with 5 characters each, but line 4 has 2 additional characters in front, which is translated, as you can see here, as thus. If you don't look at the first 2 characters, the remaining 5 characters, they match exactly with B, the red character right in the middle, and the rest of the line pivoting around it. So this means we now have identified the second section. So then the 3 lines remaining will form the last section. And can we prove that by looking for the repeating characters? Indeed, we can. In lines 6 and 7, we can easily pick out, as you can see, 2 repeating characters in the first and third positions. So 6 and 7 certainly go together. And then line 8 is just the conclusion. So it can be included with as a final part of the final section. So this is a pretty simple structural analysis of the chapter. And so we have now seen that it can be divided up into 3 sections. They all talk about slightly different but related things. The first one is a series of comparisons. The first section is a bunch of comparisons. Line 4 and 5, the middle section, is about a warning in life. This is a warning from Lao Zi. And then the last part is the solution. So let's dig into this in great detail. Let's take a look at this line by line. A lot of good stuff to talk about here. So starting with the first line. First line translated as fame or the self, which is dearer. So let's start with the first character. This character is Ming. Now, in modern Mandarin, typically when you say Ming, you mean name. So everybody has a name, and that's Ming. Here, though, it is not exactly Ming, it's a related meaning. It means fame, and you can see that the translation renders it as fame. So this is actually not unusual or surprising. It's actually something that we do in English as well. The English word name is also used in the context of fame sometimes. What do I mean by that? Is there an example? Well, yes. When we say, make a name for yourself, to make a name, we're talking about becoming well-known, becoming prominent, becoming famous. So there's the connection between name and fame. To know someone's name is to accord a degree of fame to that person. Now, fame is an important context here. It's in Mandarin, it's oftentimes used in conjunction with li. So Ming, li, 2 characters together. When we talk about people in Mandarin, we can talk about people chasing after Ming li. So Ming, the first character there, would be fame. Li would be profits, money. So fortune. So Ming li would be fame and fortune. These are the 2 primary drivers of the world, in the world that we live in, where people are engaged in the rat race, chasing after fame and fortune. And we know that there are many people out there, perhaps ourselves included, who are still doing that exact thing, chasing after fame and fortune. So Ming li, remember, those are fame and fortune, and here we're just talking about fame. We're isolating fame to ask a question about it. So let's continue on with first line. Shen. So I'm skipping one character here, Ming与身. The second character simply means it's connective. It can be and or it can be or. Shen, let's focus on the third character. This is the character that's typically used for the body. 身体 in Mandarin is the body. In this context, it's sort of like name being extended to fame. It is extended to include the idea of not just the physical self, but also the mental and spiritual self. So you can think of self as the intangible, non-physical aspects of you as a human being operating in society. Self in the mental and spiritual aspects of life. So here, so far, we're looking at a comparison between fame and the self. And the self can include physical aspects, your physical body, as well as your aspects related to society, like your reputation, your personal integrity, etc. We're about to get into that much more deeply. Both meanings are equally relevant to this line. So in the physical sense, shen is about your health, vitality, your energy, physical energy. In the non-physical sense, shen is about your character, your integrity, your values, your sense of honor, etc. All of the things that are true about you, but are not physical in nature, the intangibles. Okay, I hope you follow that so far. So now we're ready to look at the entire line. Which is dearer? Which is closer to the heart is basically what it's trying to say. And now we can see the dual meaning of shen, the body or the character, etc. We can see how that can make a lot of sense in this context. So when you compare fame with the body in the physical sense, the question that Lao Zi is asking is simple. How far would you go in the pursuit of fame? Would you sacrifice your health? Would you neglect your overall physical well-being to go after fame? Now, the answer we know just by looking at the world is yes. That a lot of times people indeed will do that. Indeed, they will sacrifice or neglect their physical health, their well-being in pursuit of fame. Now, fame is a general concept. It could just be, for instance, promotion at work. It could be a better reputation among your peers. These are all concepts that are covered by this character, fame. So people wanting to look good, wanting that promotion to a higher level position, yeah, they're willing to do a lot of things, including sacrificing their overall health. And we've seen this. We've seen stress and tension causing all kinds of issues. So we'll talk more about that. So this is an important question. We see people whose craving for external attention, approval, and validation is like a bottomless pit. It's bad news when you have a craving like that for fame, in the context of external approval, validation, etc., attention being showered upon you. It's bad news because you may never find satisfaction and fulfillment. That the more external praise you receive, because it's a bottomless pit, it can just make you feel more empty. So bad news. Indeed, when we think about it, when we think about our celebrity culture, where a huge amount of attention is being devoted to a particular person, some celebrities get, the lion's share of the attention in society. Well, that's the basis that we're all built on, and we have a lot of people who want that kind of attention, and therefore they strive to be famous in that way. If they can't do it on the basis of talent, on the basis of skills, or as far as athletes in their athletic abilities, then they will do it perhaps in a negative sense by crime, via a crime. So our world is driven positively and negatively in that way. So that's the first thing to realize about that, in that this is extremely important. This is the reason why Lao Tzu is asking that question. Now, there's a little bit more. We talked about how the self, shen, can be about aspects of you that is not the physical, not the biological body, but your being, your personhood. So the second question related to the first is about your inner self, not the external body, this vessel that we inhabit temporarily, but about your spirit or your soul, if you will, your character, your integrity, your values. How much would you sacrifice that in order to attain fame? Now, this is not an alien concept. This is something that's touching on human nature. The meaning, when we talk about this, beyond the physical body, when we talk about integrity and so on, this is similar to our old, well-known Western expression about selling your soul, making a deal with the devil. We're actually talking about a similar idea that you are sacrificing that which is valuable or important to you, but perhaps intangible, like the soul, in return for some sort of material benefit. And I hope that is easy to understand. Let's continue on. I say that it's easy to understand because we do observe this all the time. We observe people resorting to underhanded tactics to gain social advantage or career advancement. So I talked about how fame can cover things like promotion at work. And so think about the people who engage in sabotage of their fellow coworkers just so they can get ahead by climbing on top of other people. Have we seen that? Of course we have. It's part of human nature. This aspect of it has no division between East or West. No matter if you are Eastern or Western, you engage or you have seen other people engage in that kind of behavior. So we're talking about life. We're talking about life in general, the part of life that applies to all of humanity. Let's move on to line 2. Line 2 brings in something else that's related to fame. We had talked about Ming Li, fame and fortune. So now we're going to cover the Li, the fortune aspect of it, except that in ancient times, 2,500 years ago, that was not the expression. Ming Li was not the ancient expression back then. What Laozi used instead is this character, Huo. So what does it mean? Well, Huo is well used in modern Mandarin as well. It means goods or merchandise, things that have value. In the context of this line, it means material wealth, material things, material objects, signifiers of wealth, things that have value assigned to them. So now you can see where Lao Tzu is going. He's going to compare shen, your self, physical as well as intangible, to huo, which is material things. So it's easy to see where he's going with this. We can see the connection here with the first line. Just as there are people who pursue fame, certainly there are also quite a few people who pursue money. And I'm not excluding ourselves from that. We all have to make a living. That is a pursuit of monetary resources, just like everything else. Of course, I think you also see, or you intuitively understand, that Lao Tzu isn't just talking about making a living. He's talking about being greedy. He's talking about how someone can never have enough money, just like people who crave attention can never get enough attention. So the people who pursue after money in this context will be the people who never feel like they have enough, because to them, that's a bottomless pit as well. I also want to mention that fame and fortune, 名利, can be intertwined. So as an example, there are people who purely pursue fame. That's what's important to them. That's what matters to them. And there are people who purely pursue money. That's what's important to them. They don't care about being famous. And then there are people who pursue both. They want to be famous and rich. There are also, the intertwining becomes more complex and convoluted when you see how there are people who pursue fame as a way to gain wealth. Possibly, this can describe, as an example, politicians who want to climb the political ladder to become well known as a way to monetize that, as a way to make money off of it, as a way to, for instance, be privy to government plans of new construction projects in order to profit from that. So pursuing fame leading to fortune, fortune perhaps being the primary goal. And the same is true the other way, that there are people who want to make money because they want to be famous. So as an example, wealthy people who already have more than they can possibly use, they will perhaps turn those monetary resources into a way to become more well-known, perhaps through philanthropy, as an example, through charitable giving that is well publicized to make sure everybody knows what great people they are. Okay, so fame and fortune. So note that the same two aspects of Shen apply here in the same way that they did before in line 1. We talked about how much are you willing to sacrifice your health, and then how much are you willing to sacrifice your integrity in the pursuit of fame. We can ask the same question about wealth. So let's do that. The question is it worthwhile? Is it worthwhile to pursue money at the expense of your body or your health or your sense of honor, your values? The first question to start out with, to what extent are you willing to sacrifice your wealth in the pursuit of making more money? So I think you can guess that the position from Lao Tzu is that it isn't worth it if you make a lot of money, but your health is neglected and therefore poor. Now, one can make and lose successively, make and lose many fortunes. You can be wealthy and then lose it all. Well, that's actually okay. You can always make money again, especially after having some experience to know how business works. But if you sacrifice your health, Lao Tzu would say that's more important because you can end up with a permanent crippling condition if you neglect your health too much. So you can easily get to the point of no return when it comes to that. Material things, there's always going to be more of it. So in the world, in our society, we often see, people suffering from hypertension, high blood pressure, cardiovascular disease, heart attacks, stroke, stress-related illness. The list just goes on and on. So we definitely see people who can benefit from thinking about this question. Hey, am I doing the right thing, sacrificing my health just to be able to make more money? That's number one. And the second question, equally important, to what extent are you willing to compromise your values or your honor in the name of greater profits? Really? What is more important to you? To be able to live with yourself or to be able to have more money? an important question to consider. So I'm going to leave those questions as seeds that we plant that we will return to momentarily. But now we should talk about line 3, starting with the first character, de. It's translated, you can tell right here in the translation, it's translated as gain, to achieve or acquire something. Here, it specifically is talking about the gain of名 or 货. So the first 2 lines, gaining fame or gaining material wealth, gaining goods, the way that Lao Tzu put it. So remember, that's what de is referring to here. 名利, fame and fortune. Now, of course, most people will assume that this kind of gain, fame and fortune, must be a good thing, must be positive. Lao Tzu is asking, is it really? Think about it more deeply. Think about life. The pursuit of gain, pursue or gain, or of fame and or fortune bring about their own problems. If you become famous, suddenly you've lost your privacy, you've lost your freedom, you've got paparazzi following you all the time if you are really famous. So is fame really a good thing? You can no longer enjoy a walk in your neighborhood, even visiting a restaurant. You may be, people just won't leave you alone. They swarm around and giving you no peace and quiet, etc. Fame can bring problems. How about wealth? Well, the more you have, the higher your stress level, the more your fear about losing that which you possess. So it brings about worries of loss and theft. So these are valid questions to ask. And Lao Tzu, as usual, is always going to motivate us to look at a question more deeply. People say it's a good thing. Is it really a good thing? Now, the opposite is also true. Before we talk about the opposite, let's talk about this character, Huang. This character typically means death. In modern Mandarin, you would say 死亡. So death. Here, it doesn't mean death. It means the counterpart to the first character, de. It means loss. It's a tangential related meaning, and it makes sense because death is the loss of life. So extrapolating from that, you can say gain or loss, but this note that this is no longer used in modern Mandarin. This is an ancient expression. To use death to mean loss is a very ancient usage. So this part of the language has changed. All right, so now people would assume losing fame or fortune to be painful. They assume that it's a negative thing, it's a bad thing. Again, Lao Tzu is going to say, really? Is it really a bad thing? What are some good things about it? What if losing fame, losing popularity, losing the people who swarm around you all the time means you finally have some peace and quiet, have some privacy, some freedom of movement? It may not be all negative. So here, specifically, before we get into that, the loss of wealth means poverty. The loss of fame may mean you have become unpopular. The public has discarded you and moved on to the next big thing. So then the question is, people would assume loss to be more painful than gain, but would this be a question that deserves a closer look? And Lao Tzu would say yes. But let's take a look at the last character there. Bing. Bing usually means sickness, illness, being sick, being ill. Here, again, it is used in a tangential way, meaning pain or harm, or painful, harmful, because that's what illness is. It's painful and harmful. So the question, now we can put it together. The question is, gain or loss, gaining fame or fortune, or losing them, which is more painful? This is a challenge from Lao Tzu to think deeper about this life issue. People already, the majority of people out there, people, especially those who don't know much about the Tao, they already think losing fame and fortune would be painful and harmful. They probably don't think about the painful and harmful aspects of the attainment of fame and fortune. And this is the question that's being asked of you. And if you have some thoughts about that, I would very much encourage you to just go ahead and type it into the questions. It's part of the process. It's part of the interchange of ideas that we're engaged in. Now let's take a look at this line together, line 3, as one big question. The deeper meaning. So this is not usually translated or interpreted correctly. I'm very happy to have an opportunity here today to do this line justice. So level 1, most people would agree that loss of fame and fortune can be quite painful. That's the first level. Level 2, a deeper level, Tao cultivators will look a little deeper beyond the surface and see that the gaining of fame and fortune can also be painful and harmful. Yeah. The more you have, the more you worry, the more anxiety, the more stress, the more tension. And then Tao masters will look even deeper and ask the question, so which is worse, losing or gaining? Is losing necessarily worse? If you lose a great deal of wealth that you have attained, how painful is that exactly? What about the fact that because you have gained it before, there's always the potential that you can gain it back, which makes it not as painful? And even more importantly, how would you rank them against Shen, yourself, your physical well-being, and also the health, quote unquote, of your intangible self, your spirit? What if the gaining of material things is gonna be at the sacrifice of your spiritual self? What then? So to lay all this out in a way that accurately represents the thinking in Lao Tzu, in his mind, I want to lay it out for you like this. There are multiple concepts for us to consider. I'll lay them out on the left-hand side. There's the gaining of it, there's the increase of it, and then there's the decrease. So remember, the gain, de, it means attainment, achievement, acquisition, accumulation, all that. And then Wang, the character that typically means death, here is used to mean loss, when you lose it, when it's on a decrease. So the first concept would be fame. Ming, the character that was named, and this can cover social prestige, power, position. So what if you gain that? Well, what does it mean when you have a gain in terms of fame? It's climbing the social ladder, getting ahead of the competition. Seems like it could be a good thing, but as we mentioned, there can be negative things associated with it. What about loss? What about losing it? Becoming unpopular, being ignored, people turning away from you. That seems like a bad thing. But what if they ignore you so you can move about unnoticed, freely? Maybe not completely a bad thing. So the concept of fame is like yin and yang. aspects of it can be positive or negative depending on the way you look. So let's take a look at the concept of shen in terms of physical well-being, vitality, and energy. When you gain it, that just means you are enjoying good health. You look good, you feel good, and this is oftentimes the basis for not neglecting nutrition, exercise, and rest. And losing it, usually the results of neglect. You often suffer from sickness, injury, or chronic fatigue. Not fun. Now, we can see just by looking at this that if you have a loss of health, you can get back to gaining health with the proper implementation of the three components: the nutrition, the exercise, and the rest. But of course, knowing something is very different from actually doing it. And that's one of the problems that we all have. So let's talk about the other driver or the other primary motivation in the material world, and that's wealth. Huo, meaning goods or merchandise. Here, it means material wealth, material things, monetary acquisitions. So what does it mean when you gain that? Well, accumulation of material resources, and this quickly gets to a point beyond which you can actually utilize all you possess. And typically, people who have a craving for that, have a bottomless pit for that, will continue to acquire long beyond the point of necessity. And losing it, what does it mean? Well, poverty, being short on funds, having trouble keeping a roof over your head, being homeless, etc. Potential for pain and a lot of harmful effects right there. So the other aspect of shen that we talked about is the self, the intangibles, meaning your character, your values, your honor, your dignity. To gain that, the increase would mean that as you look at yourself in the mirror, as you reflect on life, you feel totally at peace. You feel happy with yourself. You know that you've lived in the right way, in accordance with the Tao. What about the flip side? Well, that's perhaps the worst of all. Feeling anxious and depressed all the time, having no peace of mind. So with this paradigm, what Lao Tzu is pointing out is what most people assume to be a good thing, like climbing the social ladder, getting ahead of the competition. What if that comes as a result of neglect so that you have no peace of mind? It is a gain, whether it's fame or wealth, at the cost of your health, your self-respect, and your peace of mind. So I think, we would reflect upon this and feel, I need some kind of balance between the two. I cannot be focused on gain in the material sense so much that I sacrifice the intangibles in life, the Tao-related aspects. So this is certainly not a dramatic new idea that Lao Tzu is presenting. Wisdom in both the Eastern and Western traditions focus on this aspect of it. We encounter this idea from time to time. It's just that a lot of times we choose to ignore. So to illustrate that, I want to give you a little quiz. I want to cite some lyrics to see if you recognize the source of the lyrics. And if you feel like you have to, you can use your lifeline to call your good friend, the Google search engine, to help you identify this. So the question, the fun little quiz here is, what is the source? What is the source of this quote, this lyrics that I'll be showing you? It's going to be a little odd because, as I look at this, I hear the music, and it's hard to stop myself from breaking into singing the lyrics, but you probably don't want to hear that. Trust me, you don't want to hear that. So the lyrics go like, the first part of it, now you're climbing to the top of the company ladder. Hope it doesn't take too long. Can't you see there'll come a day when it won't matter? Come a day when you'll be gone. So let's contemplate that for just a moment. At the end of your life, what's gonna matter the most? It's not gonna be that you earned a promotion some 40 years prior to that point, 40 years prior to your deathbed. So this part of the lyrics comes right before the chorus, and I think most people won't recognize this part. If you do recognize it, you are dating yourself. But the next part is really the part that has correspondence with this chapter. I understand about indecision, but I don't care if I get behind. People living in competition, all I want is to have my peace of mind. Does anyone recognize this? And if you do, that music is probably playing in your head already. This was a song that came out in 1978, part of an album that at the time broke all sales records. So was seen as a big deal. Rock and roll. And even though this was from a rock and roll band that usually, would sing about love, would sing about some of the other stuff in life of concern to the young. In this case, though, this particular song actually got into philosophy, got fairly deeply into philosophy to talk about how, hey, people living in competition, it's a rat race. People are trying to climb to the top of the company ladder, like climbing the social ladder we're talking about. And so all I want is to have my peace of mind because I am recognizing that those pursuits, fame and fortune, ultimately are not worth it. They are not worth it when I am looking back on my life at the end of it, on my deathbed. So, is this song jogging anyone's memory? I can see that it's definitely resonated among some people. Classic rock. And by the way, if you do recognize the song, you're dating yourself because, after all, it came out back in 1978. That's a long time ago. And the group is Boston. The song, the single is Peace of Mind. So it's all about that. The song, the singer, the musicians, all iconic. And they represent a point that coincidentally has a lot to do with what we're talking about here. So I thought it was kind of fun to say that, hey, even in rock and roll, you can never get too far away from the Tao. You can see it anywhere, not just in Asia, but in the West. We're now on to line 4. So as I mentioned, when we went through the structural analysis, the first 2 characters of line 4, 是故. These 2 characters mean thus, therefore, so. Those are the 3 ways that you can translate those 2 characters. And those 2 characters are the introductory elements in this particular line. And if you take them out, you can see that line 4 and line 5 match in poetic structure. And the matching character for the two is B. B meaning must. And both lines, line 5, line 4, both lines pivot around B, meaning XYZ must ABC. One element must to something else. In line 4, what it says is excessive love must lead to great spending. And in line 5, excessive hoarding must lead to heavy loss. So must is central to both. Now let's take a look at line 4 a little more closely. So line 4, translated as thus excessive love must lead to great spending. What I want to do is I want to isolate the 5 characters, as you can see here, and then I like to go through them one character at a time. As you know, we occasionally do this. We don't do it for every line, for every character. That will take too long. Occasionally, we come across an important line and we look at it more deeply, just like this. So the first character means excessive, too much. And then the second character that you see here that I've isolated, it's the 4th character in line 4, the second character in the parts that I'm isolating. This is the character I. It can only be translated one way, and that's love. And then B, as I mentioned, that's must. The second to last character, Da, that means big, vast, large, break. So great is what I ended up with here. And then the last character here means spend as in the sense of expenditure, like a charge, a fee, a cost. And specifically, I think of it as price. So let's put it all together, see what we get. If you string just the individual characters together, you get this idea that excessive love, loving something too much, must lead to a great expenditure. So the meaning is that if you love something too much, you have gone way beyond moderation. You must pay the price for your obsession. So here we see that line 4 is a reference to line 1 and line 3. So line 1 is about how when you chase after fame, what is the price you pay for that? Is it worth your health, your integrity, etc.? Line 3 is about gaining and losing that, like gaining and losing fame. Which one is more painful? Which one is the heavier price? If you are obsessed about becoming well-known, you end up paying a heavy price on both ends. You pay a heavy price on gaining the fame, and you also pay a heavy price upon the loss of it. Now, generally speaking, this whole idea can be extrapolated to the following principle. An obsession, and this could be fame, this could be goods, monetary value, money, fame or anything will extract the price because this thing that you obsess over, it does not or cannot love you like you love it. When Tao masters and sages come upon this concept to explain it, oftentimes they will use a classic story from Zhuangzi to explain. That story is called The Horse Lover. So I would like to present it to you now the same way that they would. So here in this slide, the title is excessive love must lead to great expenditure. The bottom, you'll see the name of the story. It's called The Horse Lover. 爱马的人. 爱, the first character is love. 马, second character means horse. And then there's the apostrophe S, and then there's person. The person who loves horse, the horse lover. So let me share that story with you from Zhuangzi. Once upon a time, in ancient China, there was a man who was incredibly obsessed with horses in general. He loved horses, all of them, any kind of horses. He spent all of his time taking care of horses, being around horses, watching horses, and he had a prized possession. He had a horse that was a powerful stallion and a tremendous value. It was strong, it was fast, it was majestic, it looked great. He loved this horse. He loved it so much that he spent a lot of time in the care and feeding of this particular stallion. In fact, he would use nothing but the best feed. He would use a large wicker basket to catch its droppings. And he would even use a container made of seashell, very valuable and very expensive. He would use that to contain its urine. And people look at this and people thought, this is kind of strange. Okay, you're really obsessed. You're really attached. You know, using not just the best feed for the horse, but these expensive containers for the droppings, for the manure and the urine. You're crazy. Now, he would tell them that, well, the reason why I wanted to use these things, because I want to remove any offending waste from the presence of my beloved steed. This right here is my beloved steed. I can't tolerate anything bad around the object of my love, this horse. So one day, he was once again feeding the stallion and also grooming the stallion. As usual, he did this all the time. And there was an interruption, an annoyance to this routine. There was a buzzing sound that he heard. So he looked around, what's going on? And he saw a large fly. You know, not unusual in a stable environment. So the fly landed on the horse, on the backside of the horse. This immediately angered the horse lover. This man became quite angry, thinking, what are you trying to do? Are you feasting on the blood of my beloved steed? I'm going to teach you a lesson right now. And the lesson is death. So he angrily slapped at it, slapped at the fly that landed on the horse's backside. So it was a sudden slap. And the horse was startled by this. It reacted instinctively, reflexively. Its legs, massively muscle, powerful, strong, kicked out with lightning speed, struck the man, the horse lover, right in the middle of his torso, dead center. Such was the force of this kick that the man was hurled back, his body crushed. He died immediately. He did not even make a sound. Then the horse resumed munching on the feed without any awareness that it had just killed its owner, the owner who loved it more than anything else in the world. That is the story of the horse lover by Zhuangzi. Now, as is the case with all Tao stories, the elements in the story are not what they seem. I want to point to some of the elements and explain the symbology of the story and talk about how this is related to the chapter that we're talking about. So first of all, the horse isn't really a horse. Zhuangzi is talking about this overwhelming obsession or attachment in your life. It's an attachment, it's obsession, because it is all consuming. Consumes all of your attention, all of your thoughts. And therefore, the horse lover isn't just a character in this particular story. Zhuangzi is really talking about you and me. He's talking about everybody. Anyone who becomes obsessed with something is the horse lover. So now, what about other elements in the story? What about the nature of attachment or obsession? Well, we know from living our lives that an attachment can become very toxic when you invest too much time and effort into it. It could start out as a seemingly harmless hobby, but then you start to spend more and more time putting in more and more effort, and suddenly it dominates your life. You get tunnel vision, you can't think of anything else. What started out as a harmless hobby is taking over. So what about in the story, the powerful kick that kills the horse lover? That's the price we pay. It's the way that Zhuangzi frames this particular story to say that when you are so obsessed over something, you pay a heavy price. Because if left unchecked, the obsession is gonna take over not just your time and effort, but also your mind. You can't stop talking about it. You make plans around it. You think about it all the time. And this cannot help but be at the sacrifice of the more important things in life. So when a fly lands on the horse, this is what happens when people attempt to intervene and interrupt your pattern. You see it in your obsession, in your obsessive state, you see it as an unwelcome intrusion. But the fly may be a necessary break. The fly may be a reminder that you are neglecting things. But you react like the horse lover in anger, you feel annoyed, and you trigger something that ends up being the price, the heavy price that you have to pay. In life, it may mean that you are so obsessed with your work that you sacrifice your health, and the kick from the horse manifests as some kind of serious health issue that eventually you have no choice but to address. Then remember that after the horse has kicked the horse lover, it continues on eating its feed. It's not aware, it doesn't care. So this is another way to say, this is sort of a very artful and creative way for Zhuangzi to say that, well, the subject of your excessive love, you may love it, but does it love you? And the answer is no, actually it doesn't. So think about sports fans who do all kinds of crazy things about the sports that they love. Does the sport love them back? Well, it can't. It's not a human being. So this is a story from the Tao of Happiness. It's in part 2. Part 2 is called Travel Advisories. Every part in the Tao of Happiness is connected to the journey of life. So there's the beginning part in the journey of life, there's travel advisories, and then there's also, of course, there comes to the end of a journey. That's part of a normal journey. And this is the metaphor often used by Zhuangzi to talk about both the beginning and the end of the life journey, where the end is what we normally associate with a huge negativity called death. Zhuangzi provides a valuable perspective on death, on life and death, I should say. And so a lot of the Zhuangzi stories are not long, but I find that they are succinct and to the point. I actually appreciate that Zhuangzi will not elaborate with a lot of complexities around stories, but will make them short and simple and convey the point exactly. Just highly targeted, highly accurate, very precise. So probably my favorite source of stories in the entirety of Tao tradition is Zhuangzi. It was a distinct honor for me to be able to write the Tao of Happiness, to really convey the stories that he wanted to tell in a very accurate way. Okay, let's move on. Let's connect the story back again to line 5 of chapter 44. So here, I need to focus on the last 2 characters here. When we talk about line 5, I want to talk first about the last 2 characters. And this is because these 2 characters are no longer used in modern Mandarin, and they can be difficult to understand even for someone who is a native speaker of Chinese. So these 2 characters, what are they? Well, Hou Wang, and you see the pinyin there. The H-O-U is pronounced like H-O, Hou, and then there's Wang, meaning death. So the meaning, the literal meaning can be confusing. Hou means thick. Wang, like I mentioned, means death. Thick death, that doesn't really mean anything to us. It can be confusing. It's also confusing to a modern speaker of Mandarin, someone who doesn't have knowledge of ancient Chinese. But let's explore what they actually mean. This is an ancient expression no longer used in modern Mandarin. So hou instead of thick, it actually means heavy, as in a lot. It's a tangential meaning. When you say hou, in this case, you just mean a great quantity, a huge amount. Heavy duty. Wang, we've talked about this in line 3. It means death, yes, but the tangential meaning is the loss of life. So the tangential meaning is loss rather than death. Putting those together make a lot more meaning, make a lot more sense. So rather than thick death, what it's actually saying is a lot of loss or heavy loss. And that's how you see it in the translation here. And that's 100% accurate, despite the fact that it's been probably centuries since people use that expression. So now let's take a look at the entire line. Line 5. Excessive hoarding must lead to heavy loss. So this is a warning about life, just like line 4. Line 4 says excessive love leads to great spending. Here, excessive hoarding leads to heavy loss. So I think it's easy to understand this particular line. The more you hoard, the more likely it is for you to suffer some kind of loss, maybe theft, maybe damage. And here's the point that I want to make. Even when there's no theft or damage, hoarding is still a bad thing. It's still something that extracts a price, just like, excessive love obsession, too much attachment leads to you having to pay the price. Here, hoarding extracts a price from you because hoarding takes up a lot of space. It can be physical clutter that takes up physical space. It can be mental clutter that takes up mental space. Now, why do people accumulate clutter? Well, it's because a lot of times, and I know this from personal experience, I'll look at something and I'll think to myself, wow, I may need this one day. But then I accumulate so much that when I actually, on one occasion, when I actually do need it, I can't find it because I've accumulated way too much. I've hoarded way too much. So hoarding means you cannot find what you need when you need it. Ironically, the common reason we hoard is I may need this one day. So it's not a great idea all around. Certainly not a great idea for life, for living life in accordance with the Tao. Let's go to line 6. Knowing contentment avoids disgrace. Okay. Let's isolate the first two characters to talk about that, an important concept in the Tao. 知足. So what is that? Those two characters, literally, the first character means to know something. And then the second character, 足, means enough or sufficient. So to know that you have sufficiency is to know that you don't need to get more. It means feeling content. To know that you have enough is to understand the true meaning of contentment. Now, the significance here is that the last two lines, line 4 and line 5, were warnings about life. You know, too much love, you're gonna have to pay the price. Too much hoarding, again, you're gonna have to pay the price. Those are warnings about life. Here, line 6, line 7, line 8, these are solutions from Lao Tzu. So starting with this line, Lao Tzu explains how we can avoid the heavy prices extracted by too much, lack of moderation, too much attachment, too much hoarding. And I want to further delve into the concept of contentment. Here's what I believe. Magic happens when you truly understand the concept of contentment. This is an easy cure. When you understand, when you realize, when you accept completely that you already possess all the necessities of life, you transition to a place when you don't need to engage in hoarding. You just don't need to do it, because why even hoard when you already have everything you're gonna need? And the other important thing is that there is a treasure in human connections that should not be neglected. Rather than to be like the horse lover is loving something, the horse, that cannot return its love, that doesn't care if it accidentally kills its owner. So instead of a pursuit that cannot return your love, spend time with family and loved ones, because they can return your love. They are human beings. So the overall idea of contentment is something that's central to the Tao. And therefore, I want to use a story to illustrate that. It's an actual historical account of a historical figure. And this is a story called 知足 from this chapter, which means knowing contentment. This goes back to the Ming Dynasty, that once upon a time in ancient China, during the Ming Dynasty, there was a scholar by the name of Hu Jiushao. The name Hu Jiushao can also be pronounced Hu Jiushao, but typically you hear people say Hu Jiushao. It's correct to sound it out either way. By convention, I'll just say Hu Jiushao. So Hu was someone who grew up poor, as were many people back in the days of ancient China. He grew up poor and he remained poor throughout most of his life. But despite his poverty, he was always happy. His life consisted of reading his books because he was a scholar, doing the work that he ought to do, and he could only maintain, subsistence level of living for himself and his family. But he was happy and satisfied with this. He was grateful, always had a smile, always radiated his inner joy, and every day he established a ritual. He had a pattern. He would burn incense and he would pay respects to heaven, bowing to heaven 9 times. And it was to thank heavens for the blessings in life, for giving him yet another day of goodness, of positive energy. He did this all the time. Now, it's important to note that nobody else did this. People at the time, just like most human beings that we come across today, people are usually full of complaints, full of negativity. They usually were talking about how they were lacking this or that, but he never did. Instead, he was expressing gratitude all the time. So one day, his wife, seeing him expressing thanks and gratitude to heaven once again, was making fun of him, was laughing at him, saying that, well, look, we as a family, we don't have a whole lot, and you know it. The meals that we have, they are the most basic imaginable. There's just the rice, there's, just a few entrees. There's nothing spectacular. There are no luxuries that we enjoy. What are you thanking heaven for exactly? You're thanking heaven for just the basics. So Hu responded to his wife saying that, well, yes, I am. And in fact, there are quite a few things that I am especially grateful for. He said, first, I'm very grateful to live in a time of relative peace and quiet in our part of the world. Notice that there's no chaos, strife, and misery associated with warfare. Historically, that hasn't always been the case. In fact, this is the first time in a long time, in the long history of China, that we've had extended peace throughout the land. So we're not fearing the danger of losing our lives to marauding military forces going back and forth. I'm grateful for that. Why should I not be grateful? And he continued, he pointed to the basic food that they had, just rice, some vegetables, that's pretty much it. He pointed to that and he said, I am so grateful to have enough that we can live not luxuriously, but at least we can go on in comfort. We have food on the table, we have clothes that we can wear to keep us warm. I am very glad, very grateful we're not out on the streets. We're not exposed to the elements, right? We're not hungry, not knowing where the next meal was going to come from. We're not freezing at night, having no place to stay. We have the very opposite of that. Why wouldn't I be grateful? That's the second thing that I'm the most grateful for. And lastly, our family, we have our family together. We are doing relatively well. We don't have anyone who is suffering a crippling disease or injuries. We don't have anyone in the family who has been imprisoned, who's in jail. We have our health, we have our freedom. Why wouldn't I be grateful, thankful for that? I have all the reasons in the world to be thankful. Now, his wife was not expecting such a long, lengthy discourse on the reasons to be grateful, but at the same time, everything that her husband said made a world of sense. He was talking about things that most people had taken for granted. Everybody who was complaining about how they were lacking this or that, they could actually claim the same things. Most of them also lived in a time of relative peace in that part of the world. Most of them had the basics of life: food, dwelling. Most of them had no crippling illness, people in jail. So most of them have all the reasons in the world to be grateful. So this is the historical account of a historical figure, and there's an important point here that I also want to make sure isn't lost. If I talk about those three things, you might say, well, but I know someone, who does, for instance, have illness, who is suffering from illness. I know someone else who has trouble with the law. So what about that? I don't have those three elements for which to express my gratitude, right? That would actually be missing the point of the story. Let me explain. What this scholar was pointing out was the basic truth. No matter what is going on in your life, if you look through the Tao, you can always see ample reasons for contentment. And I'll give you an example right here and now. What he said back then in the Ming Dynasty, it applied to the people that he knew. Right now, I can also look through the Tao at you, at me, at everybody involved in this meeting, and be able to say the following. First, we all possess the potential for betterment. What do I mean by that? Well, simply by existing, by being alive. You, me, everybody in this meeting, we already possess the possibility of making things better today than yesterday. And hopefully, listening to this talk is a good start. So we all have this potential for betterment. That's a good thing. That's a positive thing. There's no denying it. Number two, we actually have abundant resources. You may not think so, but we have time. We have human connections with one another, if no one else. We have unique knowledge. Everybody knows something that is unique to them. They bring their special knowledge and expertise to everything. We have abundant resources that we haven't even tapped into. We have everything we need. That's number two. And number three, we have the Tao. So this is something that applies to all of us, although I know that it may not apply to many people out there because they have no idea what the Tao is about. But you and I, at least, were able to study the Tao. We're able to become more aware about these issues that Lao Tzu is talking about. We, you, me, we all have Lao Tzu has a personal advisor. How cool is that? Why wouldn't I be grateful about that? So on that note, we are nearing the end of our time together today. So I want to jump to the summary. And I want to make an attempt to summarize everything that we have talked about so that you have some takeaways. In this summary, I want to invite you to pause for a moment to reflect upon life. This is something, I'm very serious about this. This is something that I hope you can do at some point today, or do it now. So the reflection comes in the form of questions. Are we spending too much time and effort chasing after material things or trying to look good for the sake of other people's approval? I'm a realist. I know that we live in this material world. We live in this society where there is always an emphasis on the material, on the reputation, on external validation and approval, etc. We're not completely away from it, and perhaps we can never be. The question we can ask, though, is whether or not we're devoting way too much effort, paying too much attention to those things. And it's possibly true. It's related to the second question. In paying too much attention, spending too much time and effort chasing after material things or trying to look good, have we neglected the more important things in life? Perhaps basic things like strengthening relationships with those who care about us. Well, in some cases, that could be true, and if so, it's time for corrective actions. Number 3, as we charge full speed ahead, and let's admit to ourselves that we oftentimes do that in our pursuit of material things, trying to look good, we're oftentimes going as fast as we can. But as we charge full speed ahead, perhaps we can overshoot the target. Perhaps we can be going too fast to really appreciate life itself. Why not slow down and consider the possibility of coming to a stop? Stop to, quote unquote, smell the roses. Why not? So finally, as a reminder, these are the 4 characters that I hope everyone will keep in mind in the week ahead. 知足常乐. First character means to know. The second character is contentment, sufficiency, having enough, having all you need. 常, constant, everlasting. 乐, joy. To know contentment is to have everlasting joy in your life. I want to present that as a truth, and I also want to present it to you as a blessing for your week to come. Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Let us travel safely. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.